In December 1975, a 25-year-old engineer at Eastman Kodak Company took the world's first digital photograph. The subject was a lab technician named Joy Marshall. The image was a black and white grid of 10,000 pixels. It took 23 seconds to record to a cassette tape and another 30 seconds to display on a television screen. The camera weighed 3.5 kilograms and was roughly the size of a toaster. Steve Sasson had just changed the future of photography. Kodak's response was to tell him to keep it quiet. The marketing department was told about the invention. Their conclusion was unambiguous. They could sell the camera, but they would not, because it would eat away at film sales. And film was where the money was. 37 years later, on January 19, 2012, Eastman Kodak Company filed for bankruptcy. A company that had controlled 90% of the American film market and 85% of camera sales had vaporized $30 billion in market value. 130,000 jobs were gone. The fifth most valuable brand in the world in 1996 was delisted from the New York Stock Exchange. The technology that destroyed Kodak had been invented in Kodak's own laboratory by one of Kodak's own engineers in 1975. This is the Kodak story, and the marketing lesson inside it is one that every business in the world is still learning the hard way. If you are into stories like this, brands that invented their own downfall, companies that saw the future coming and looked away, this channel covers one every Thursday. Hit subscribe. 2 seconds. Now back to Kodak. To understand what Kodak lost, you first have to understand what it was. George Eastman founded the Eastman Kodak Company in Rochester, New York in 1892. His goal, stated explicitly, was to make the camera as convenient as the pencil. In 1888, he had already introduced the first Kodak camera with a slogan that defined the brand for the next century. You press the button. We do the rest. Eastman built an empire on simplicity. Before Kodak, photography required a wagon full of chemicals and a darkroom. After Kodak, anyone could take a photograph of their family, mail the camera to Rochester, and receive their prints and a freshly loaded camera in the post. He had not just invented a product, he had invented the concept of consumer photography itself. By 1976, Kodak controlled 95% of the film market and 85% of camera sales in the United States. In a single year, there was a 90% chance that any photograph taken anywhere in America was captured on Kodak film, printed on Kodak paper. The company had revenues approaching $10 billion and employed over 100,000 people globally. Then in 1974, a supervisor named Gareth Lloyd gave a young electrical engineer named Steve Sasson a task that seemed at the time entirely unimportant. He was asked to investigate whether a recently created component called a charge-coupled device could be used to produce an image sensor for a camera. Sasson was 24 years old. He had no particular brief to change photography. Nobody was asking him to develop a camera. He was simply tinkering with a technology to see if it worked. By December 1975, he had his answer. The device he built combined a lens from a Kodak movie camera, 16 batteries, an analog to digital converter, and several dozen circuits wired together on 6 circuit boards. It weighed 3.5 kilograms. It took 50 milliseconds to capture an image and 23 seconds to write it to a cassette tape. The resulting photograph was a black and white grid of 10,000 pixels, barely enough resolution to make out a human face. When Sasson demonstrated it to Kodak's executives in 1976, he described what happened next. They asked me how this worked. Actually, they did not ask me how it worked. They simply asked me why anybody would want to take a picture this way when there was nothing wrong with conventional photography. Sasson told them that digital photography might be ready to match film quality in 15 to 20 years. The response was not to accelerate development, it was to classify the project as confidential. Kodak patented the device in 1978, and then they set it aside. This decision is the one that most histories use to condemn Kodak. But the truth is more complicated and more instructive than a simple story about executives ignoring the future. In 1975, digital photography was genuinely not ready. The image quality was poor. There was no practical way to display or share the photographs. Personal computers barely existed. The idea that ordinary consumers would want to view their holiday photographs on a television screen rather than hold a print in their hands required a cultural change that had not yet happened and could not be scheduled. The real mistake was not what Kodak did in 1975. The real mistake was what Kodak failed to do in the decade that followed. In 1984, the Los Angeles Olympics came to America. Kodak had sponsored the Olympics for decades. Its yellow logo was as much a part of the games as the athletes themselves. But when the bidding opened for the 1984 sponsorship, Kodak's management looked at the price and decided it was too expensive. Their brand was already ubiquitous. American consumers would never choose a Japanese film brand over Kodak. The sponsorship was unnecessary. A Japanese company called Fujifilm disagreed. Fuji paid for the official film sponsorship of the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics and used it to do exactly what Kodak had feared it could not do. Within the first 30 months after the campaign, Fuji's film sales in the United States jumped 30%. By 1997, Fujifilm had 33% of the American market. A company that Kodak's own managers had dismissed as a minor irritant had captured a third of their empire while Kodak watched. But here is where the story stops being about film and starts being about the future Kodak had already invented and chosen not to build. In 1989, Steve Sasson and a colleague named Robert Hills built the first self-contained digital single-lens reflex camera prototype inside Kodak's own laboratories. It was practical. It worked. Kodak declined to sell it. The decision was the same as 1975. The product would eat into film sales. By 1991, Kodak had released its first commercially available digital camera, the digital camera system. But it was priced at $13,000. It was targeted at professional photographers. It was not the mass-market product that the technology had already made possible. It was a product designed not to disrupt film. In 1993, Kodak hired George Fisher, the former chief executive of Motorola, to lead the company through digital transformation. Fisher was an engineer and a respected executive. He saw digital cameras as an opportunity to coexist alongside film rather than replace it. He restructured the company, replaced many executives, and began investing in digital products. His strategy was reasonable for the early 1990s when digital photography was still expensive and the pace of change seemed manageable. What Fisher did not account for, what nobody at Kodak fully accounted for, was how fast the price of digital cameras would fall once the consumer electronics industry got involved. In 1999, digital camera sales in the United States were 1.5 million units. By 2003, they were 17 million. By 2007, film camera sales in the United States had declined by more than 90% from their 1999 peak. From 2003 to 2011, Kodak shed 47,000 jobs, 13 manufacturing plants, and 130 processing labs. It had not made an annual profit since 2004. On January 19, 2012, Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Its stock, which had traded above $90 a share in the mid-1990s, fell to 15 cents. The Economist ran the headline, "After 132 years, Kodak is poised like an old photo to fade away." The most painful detail in the entire collapse is this one. In 2012, the company that had filed for bankruptcy began selling its patent portfolio to raise money. Among those patents were the fundamental digital imaging patents that Steve Sasson had developed inside Kodak's laboratories beginning in 1975. Kodak sold the future. It had invented to the companies that had used that future to destroy it. Now consider what Fujifilm did with the same information, facing the same existential threat. Fujifilm's chief executive Shigetaka Komori declared internally that the company faced a crisis of the disappearance of its core business. Not a challenge, not a disruption, an extinction event that required the company to rebuild itself from scratch. Fujifilm had developed deep expertise in chemistry, optical technology, and fine materials through its film business. In the 2000s, it took that expertise and applied it to entirely different industries: pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and medical imaging. The same chemical compounds that made Fujifilm's photographic films resist oxidation and aging turned out to have applications in skincare products. The precision optics that went into camera lenses could be applied to medical endoscopes. The company reinvented itself using the skills it already had in industries that had nothing to do with photography. Today, Fujifilm is a $21 billion company. Its healthcare division generates more revenue than its imaging division. It survived the death of the industry it was founded to serve by understanding what it actually was underneath the product it sold. Kodak understood itself only as a film company. Fujifilm understood itself as a precision materials and chemistry company that happened to be in film. That difference in self-perception is the entire story. 3 marketing and business lessons from the Kodak collapse. Lesson 1. The innovator's dilemma is not a theory. It is a death sentence if you ignore it. Clayton Christensen, the Harvard Business School professor who coined the phrase innovator's dilemma, used Kodak as one of his defining examples. The dilemma is this: every technology that will eventually destroy your business begins by being worse than your current product. Digital photography in 1975 was objectively worse than film photography. It was slow, low resolution, and impractical. The rational business decision was not to invest in it, but the technology improved, and by the time digital photography was good enough to compete with film, it was already too late to respond. This is not unique to Kodak. It is the pattern of every disruption in history. The mistake is not failing to see the technology. The mistake is believing that worse than current is the same as never going to matter. Lesson 2. Protecting your existing revenue is not a strategy. It is a delay. Kodak's decision to classify Sasson's digital camera as confidential, to price its first commercial digital cameras at $13,000, to design every digital initiative around not cannibalizing film was not irrational. Film was generating 80% of Kodak's profits. Every rational financial analysis said, protect the film business. But protecting the film business only meant that when film died, everything died with it. The companies that survived the digital transition, Canon, Sony, Nikon, had built digital businesses before they needed them. Kodak built its digital business while hoping film would survive long enough to make it unnecessary. It did not. Lesson 3. Knowing who you are is more important than knowing what you sell. Kodak knew it sold film. Fujifilm knew it was a precision chemistry and materials company. When film died, Kodak had nothing to fall back on. Fujifilm had 130 years of accumulated expertise that could be redirected. The brands and businesses that survive technological disruption are almost never the ones that saw the future clearest. They are the ones that understood their own capabilities deeply enough to apply them somewhere new when the old market disappeared. What does your company actually know how to do? Strip away the product, strip away the market. What are the underlying skills and capabilities that create the value? That question is the only defense against disruption that has ever actually worked. Steve Sasson received the National Medal of Technology and Innovation from President Obama in 2009. He was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. The photograph of him receiving that medal from the President of the United States was taken on a digital camera. In 2012, Kodak filed for bankruptcy. In 2013, it emerged, a fraction of its former size, focused on commercial printing and packaging. It never returned to consumer photography. There is one store in Bend, Oregon, that still rents videos on VHS tape. There is no equivalent for film photography. The technology is gone. The industry Kodak built and then failed to protect is gone. The camera that made photography as convenient as a pencil is now inside every telephone on Earth. Steve Sasson built the first one in a Kodak laboratory in 1975, and the company told him to keep it quiet. If this video changed how you think about disruption and what it costs to protect the present at the expense of the future, drop a comment below. I want to know, was Kodak's failure inevitable? Or was there a moment where a different decision could have changed everything? And if you want to see how Volkswagen spent 7 years building a marketing campaign on top of a lie and paid 31 billion euros for it, that video is right here. Subscribe so you do not miss next Thursday.